Joining me now to discuss this disturbing trend, Ohio Republican gubernatorial candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek, before we broaden this out, maybe even to include Cincinnati in the state where you're running for governor, Ohio, let's talk about what you're seeing right there in Washington, D.C. President Trump has pointed out many of the people involved in this attack in D.C. were 14, 15, 16 years old.
So it's a major juvenile crime issue, and you're right, Will, to point out this is a trend we're seeing across the country as younger and younger criminals. I think there's two prongs that we have to push back on this wave of crime. Number one is just the short-term stuff of the juvenile court system. So often in the juvenile court system, what happens is you come in, you're cycled right back out as a violent offender just because it's juvie court. Well, if these juvenile offenders are committing non-juvenile crimes that are endangering Americans, we need to ensure that we increase the bail and bond requirements to be able to release one of those young people, to be able to actually intervene to upstream causes. Many of these kids haven't been in school. And this is one of the unseen costs of the COVID-19 school closures, Will. I know these may seem like separate issues, but they're actually deeply linked. Truancy has gone up massively in the last 4 years. When you shut down those schools and then they reopened, many of those students didn't go back. When they're not in school, they're on the streets committing violence. And so this is a cycle that goes all the way from law enforcement and juvenile courts, go upstream to the problems in our schools. And then we can have a deeper discussion of even going upstream to the problem in our families, ironically created by Washington, D.C., creating the incentives for so many broken families that allow their youth to be on the streets committing these crimes. And I think we need to be having every one of those conversations on every level.
Actually, I think I want to swim straight upstream with you right now, Vivek. I want to ask you a question. It's not a gotcha question. It's a curiosity. Did you ever see The Wire by David Simon on HBO?
I watched a few episodes of it, in Baltimore. Yeah, it was a good show.
Yeah, it's about the drug trade in Baltimore. And one of the seasons, I believe it's the third or the fourth season, focused on kids. It focused on the school system. And I remember this scene, and many people that watched it will remember this moment, where they bring kids in something like 7th or 8th grade, and they're trying to reach these children. And the chief of police said, too late. You have to get younger. My point is, you have mentioned this when it comes to what we saw about a week and a half ago in Cincinnati. And many people have talked about the problems in law enforcement in terms of the way that they have been neutered, the way that law enforcement has not been supported, the way the criminal justice system has churned out people. As soon as they go through the gate, they come out the other side of the gate. But I do think you have to swim upstream, to your point, and say we have a cultural problem. When I see this happening on our streets, it's not just about law enforcement. There's something wrong with the culture, and there's something wrong with families.
Deeply correct, Will. And I think we got to do both things, to be clear. I'm looking to lead a state. There are some short-term common sense solutions in the criminal justice system, in the bond reform system, in giving law enforcement more authority to actually do their jobs on the streets. All of that's important, but that's just symptomatic therapy. You want to go to the cure, the root cause? It dates back to Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. 60 years ago, the greatest misnomer in the history of American policy, creating the incentives for the breakdown of the family, harming the very minority communities that he was supposedly setting out to help, paying single mothers more money not to have a married man in the house than to actually then instead be married to Uncle Sam. That's created all of the bad incentives we could imagine. We know kids who are born in a single parent household, in a fatherless household, are multiple times more likely to end up in prison, multiple times more likely to commit a crime, not to graduate from high school, to end up in poverty. And yet it's our federal government that's actually responsible for it. And so often this discussion, let's be honest, does follow some racial contours. For me, I don't blame black or white. I blame the federal government. And that's something that I think we have to open our eyes to see is, ironically, you talked about crime in Washington, D.C. Well, the ultimate crime in Washington, D.C. is ultimately committed by our policymakers who keep these broken incentives in place that result in that violent wave of crime and disorder in cities across the country. And until we get back to that root cause of restoring the power of the nuclear family, the root cause of restoring cultural respect for order and law and order is part of the national identity of the United States of America. Until we get to those root causes, we're just going to seeing churn of symptomatic therapy in the meantime. And I'm glad we're having that conversation.
Yeah, I am as well, because I think that part of what is incumbent upon politicians or would-be politicians seeking office, in your case in Ohio, is to have that real conversation. So I appreciate you having that in part with me here today, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Thank you.
All right. President Trump